From the EWTN Radio and Television Studios, this is EWTN Theology Roundtable, a conversation with the experts of EWTN's Department of Theology. Got questions about the liturgy, scripture, or tradition? They have the answers. Now, EWTN Theology Roundtable.
Welcome to EWTN Theology Roundtable here on the EWTN Global Network. Elena Rodriguez giving you a very warm welcome to this very interesting show dedicated to our Most Blessed Mother. And in that, it includes all of us. And it was 100 years ago that the three shepherd children in Fátima, Portugal, had an amazing vision, the apparition of Our Lady of Fatima. And then we wonder, with everything that has changed in the world in 100 years, there is something that remains constant. How is it possible that something that happened 100 years ago is still so current today and will continue to be current? To talk about the importance of the messages of Our Lady in Fatima and the continuing importance throughout our time in history, we have our Theology Roundtable panel to precisely address that topic with you and to have your questions. So we're going to open up our lines in just a moment here. I'm going to give you the number, and that number is 1-800-585-9396. That number again is 1-800-585-9396. Our brave call screener, Matt Gavinsky, ready on the phone lines to talk to you. And we want to welcome at this time the host of EWTN Theology Roundtable, Colin Donovan. Colin, welcome.
Welcome to you as well, our producer.
Thank you. It's great to have you here as the head and vice president of theology at EWTN. And certainly, I know that this is a topic that is near and dear to your heart, as it is as well to our theology advisors, Robert Klesko and David Gregson, joining us for this show, answering your questions and talking about the importance of that message. 100 years is nothing compared to infinity and God, but to us it seems to be a long time, yet the message of Fatima is so current today, Colin.
I mean, it certainly is. The whole call for penitence, for prayer, reparation, to bring about peace, manifested in so many different ways. Our TV producer, Jason, brought to my attention that a statue of Our Lady of Fatima is going to the United Nations next week, and certainly to show the member states of the United Nations that peace, while it's their work, is also heaven's work, and we always have to keep that in the front of our minds. But I think what we wanted to do with this show is not give a blow-by-blow account of Fatima. I think most of our audience is familiar with it. There'll be lots of opportunity. We'll have other Fatima-themed programs during the course of this 6 months of celebration of the 100th anniversary. But we wanted to sort of bring our own personal touch to it, and so I asked Robert and David to pick something personal that really strikes them in the Fatima message. And I think it shows, and this will become apparent when we talk about these things, that besides being this somewhat apocalyptic call for prayer and penitence, unless you do this, then this will happen, war and sufferings of the Pope and the Church and so on, Fatima in many ways is a compendium of Catholic teaching on a great deal of subject, and we sort of looked at it in that way. And I know, David, you looked at the question of light, which, as Aquinas speaks of it, is the created analogy closest to the idea of God, because this idea of transparency, it's not material, but is it spiritual? So in the created order, light is often used to speak of God and certainly to speak of Christ. So what specifically in the events at Fatima hit this chord in you?
Well, the description of the Lucia's description of the angel of peace that appeared to the three children and in preparation for the apparitions of Our Lady. The angel identified himself as the angel of peace, and Lucia writes in her journal, "On each occasion that the angel appeared, he appeared in the form of a young man, transparent and much brighter than crystal, pierced by the rays of the sun." the angel told them to offer up prayers and sacrifices, to offer everything that they did as a sacrifice in reparation for offenses against God, and in particular to offer themselves in the Mass with Jesus to God the Father and to adore the Blessed Sacrament. Then on May 13th, 1917, the children saw the Blessed Mother for the first time. Lucia writes in her journal, "We beheld a lady all dressed in white. She was more brilliant than the sun, and radiated a light more clear and intense than a crystal glass filled with sparkling water when the rays of the burning sun shine through it." They understood that light that she radiated was God himself, seeming to echo the Eastern doctrine of the uncreated light, the light of Tabor, which sanctified souls are enabled to see. And what was the effect of this light on the children? Lucia writes, "Our Lady opened her hands for the first time, communicating to us a light so intense that as it streamed from her hands, its rays penetrated our hearts and the innermost depths of our souls, making us see ourselves in God, who is that light, more clearly than we see ourselves in the best of mirrors." In this new knowledge of themselves, they developed an intense hatred of sin and a great desire to live in such a way as to be pleasing to God in everything that they did. Now this light radiating from Mary seems to illustrate Mary's role as the mediatrix of all graces, that all the graces flowing from Christ, the true light, are communicated to us through the hands of his mother. The second apparition on June 13th, the children again experienced God in the light of Mary. Moreover, they saw in the palm of Our Lady's right hand a heart encircled by piercing thorns, and this they understood to be the Immaculate Heart of Mary, outraged by the sins of humanity and seeking reparation. The third apparition on July 13th, the children were given a frightening vision of hell. They were told that in order to save the souls of sinners bound there, God wished to establish devotion to Mary's Immaculate Heart. In her final three apparitions, Our Lady reinforced her teaching on the love of God, love of neighbor, and she called for faith, conversion, prayer, and penance for the sins of others.
There's sort of a very fine and significant connection here, I think, in this respect, with the appearances to Catherine Labouré at Rue du Bac in Paris, where Our Lady is seen light coming from her hands, and it's explained that those represented the graces that no one ever asked for, and all they must do is ask. This idea of God immediately through even created instruments, and not that's just God directly to us. The human nature of Christ is an instrument, and it's in the centerpiece of the redemption. The human nature of Our Lady, by which that human nature of Christ came into the world, is at the center of that order of the Incarnation, as John Paul II called it. So this idea of mediation, just as the angel and Our Lady is telling them to be mediators on behalf of others. And I think there's a connection. And you, in the Byzantine Marian theology and devotion and experience, there are similar kinds of connections, I believe.
Yeah. Well, what I chose to reflect on, really building on Dave's points, is that experience of the Transfiguration, that light of Tabor, which is so permeates Eastern theology. I wanted to look at that, and that got me thinking about the other elements of the apparition that tie us back to Scripture. So, during the apparitions, the children see Mary standing on a cloud. Now, that's reminiscent, of course, of the event of the Transfiguration, where Jesus and Peter, James, and John experience that cloud, and that's that overwhelming presence of God, and then experiencing the light coming from Christ. And of course, if we think about the Old Testament, the cloud of glory that descended on the tabernacle to indicate God's presence. Now, when we tie that back to Mary, well, she's standing on the cloud. Well, what does God's presence do? It elevates us. It supports us. It lifts us up. God's presence in the soul, that theosis that we undergo. And of course, Mary is the ultimate human being to experience ultimate theosis, the indwelling of God in her, in her womb, and sustaining her throughout her life and now in eternity. The presence of God, the grace of God, builds up our nature, and so we become more partakers of the divine nature. And then I also reflected on Mary's presence in the book of Revelation. In Revelation chapter 12, verse 1, John is describing this woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And that got me thinking of the connection between the apparition at Fátima and the apparition at Guadalupe, where Mary is depicted as standing on the crescent moon. And thinking of that symbolism as well in regard to light. The moon, of course, reflects the light of the sun. What a perfect analogy. That's what Mary does. She reflects the light of her Son. And so we get that grace of Christ through Mary. So that very de Montfort principle to Jesus through Mary. And also the symbolism of the moon takes on a cultural dimension at Guadalupe. The moon for the Aztec people represented the goddess of night, a very, very dark and shaded and kind of evil presence. And Mary's standing on that to show that she's triumphing. So I know part of the message of Fátima is the triumph of the Immaculate Heart, the triumph of Mary over paganism. Now, it can be the Aztec form of paganism, but certainly it can be the paganism of communistic atheism, which was so prevalent at the time.
Or the practical atheism of our own culture.
Exactly. And the moon is also a symbol in Islam. The crescent moon is on a lot of flags of Muslim countries. And that got me thinking, well, Fatima is Muhammad's daughter. And this was the place where Mary chose to appear, at this crossroads between East and West, between Russia, between everything that was going on there in the World War, and also the looming threat of Islam. And I think this has such a relevance to our day as well. I mean, Pope Francis just got back from Egypt. And wasn't that a trip of rebuilding, of building bridges between certainly the Coptic Christians, the Coptic Orthodox, and Catholics, but certainly between all Christians and Islam. And you hear reports coming out of the Middle East all the time of Muslims converting to Christianity, and of course they revere Mary in Islam. She's the woman who's most talked about in the Quran. I think she might even be the only woman talked about in the Quran. But really we see throughout this, building on that theme of light, the light that Mary brings into the world, that in these areas where Mary is reverenced, whether it's in Portugal by Catholics, whether it's in Egypt by Coptic Christians, or whether now it's in Moscow by the Orthodox Christians and the resurgence of Orthodoxy in Russia, where Mary is revered, evil, the tide of evil is drawn back. We make progress against evil, whether it's the evil of atheism or the evil of radical Islam. Where Mary is revered, there's tremendous success. And that success is all moving us towards Christ. And of course, Christ is the giver of all peace.
I think that's very, very well put. It's almost a cliche, but it's one that hardly is ever talked about, that there is in the message of Fátima an implied message regarding the role that Islam has in relationship to Christianity. Not specifically Muslims in general, because clearly, obviously, it's a different religion. They're not Catholic, but in particularly as an existential threat, radical Islam, as radical atheistic communism was. So we can take up this topic and others, I guess, when we come back from our break and look a little bit more at maybe some of the interesting details of the message of Fatima here in the 100th anniversary year.
So we are opening up our phone line so you can call in with your questions, and the number is 1-800-585-9396. That number again is 1-800-585-9396. Your questions about Our Lady of Fatima apparitions, stay tuned.
Welcome to EWTN's Catholic Almanac.
It's May 5th, and today the Church honors St. Angelus of Jerusalem. He became a Carmelite, converting many Jews in Sicily. In 1220, he was martyred for denouncing an extramarital affair of a local leader. By the way, we honor Our Lady during the month of May. Many sources describe the Blessed Virgin using flowers. For example, Bede the Venerable compared the white petals of a lily to Mary's purity of body.
Some atheists attack the faith by propping up a ridiculous idea that no one actually has about God, and then knocking that idea down. Many proponents of atheism claim that we Christians believe in a God that's like a mythological creature flying around in space. The lead atheist, Richard Dawkins, has famously said that we might as well believe in a flying spaghetti monster. And an atheist Russian cosmonaut is credited with looking around in space and saying, "Well, I'm here, and I don't see God anywhere." Friends, that would be like Frodo reaching the summit of Mount Doom and saying, "I'm here looking around and there's no evidence of J.R.R. Tolkien anywhere." Frodo, you're in the story. Christians don't believe in a mythological creature flying around in space. We believe in a God who's the source of all creation, a God who is existence itself. He's not some powerful being in creation. All creation is in Him. As St. Paul penned, "In Him we live, we move, and have our being." That's what we mean when we say God. This is Chris Stefanik from RealLifeCatholic.com on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to EWTN Theology Roundtable on EWTN Radio and Television. Join our conversation with your question or comment. Call us toll-free, 1-800-585-9396. Outside the United States and Canada, call 1-205-271-2985 or send us an email, etr@ewtn.com.
And EWTN Theology Roundtable continues here on the EWTN Global Network. We are speaking with our theologians Colin Donovan, Robert Klesko, and David Gregson about the importance, the continuing importance of the apparitions at Our Lady of Fatima. 100 years ago, still current today, and still current to be in the future. And Colin, it is so very interesting, as we were discussing a moment ago, how the messages of Our Lady of Fatima really transcend all frontiers, all borders of culture and language, and even through the interreligious border. One of the questions that you might have here for our theologians, and I'll invite you to call, is if you are from a different faith, or if you have conversations with people from different faiths, how can that message of Our Lady of Fatima go out to illuminate their lives as well? The number is 1-800-585-9396, and we have some lines still open. This is a good moment to call, 1-800-585-9396. And Colin, how you and David and Robert were beautifully putting it, the light of the message of Fatima really illuminates our life in history.
It does, and there's so much in there. I wanted to make maybe one little point here before we move on, and that is, for me, an area that interested me was he's not well developed, but Joseph's role, the role of St. Joseph, yes, the foster father of the Lord. He appears in the last apparitions on the October 13th, while the people are experiencing this miracle of the sun. The children are actually experiencing visions. And among those were, on the one hand, St. Joseph carrying the child Jesus in his paternal, fatherly role, and that relationship totally dependent, of course, on the child, in a way, not the father, but nonetheless in a human relationship, the child on the father. And then in the appearance of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And the 2 points I get out of that is, first, regarding Our Lady of Mount Carmel, because Sister Lucy was actually asked about that. She said that Our Lady of Mount Carmel is most known for the brown scapular. And at first she didn't know what to call her. She said Our Lady of the Two Cards, because she had the scapular with her. And she said, well, it looks like Our Lady of Mount Carmel in the parish church. But she would insist later on that the wearing of the scapular is an integral part of the message of Fátima. And she does that not because Our Lady told her so, but because she's been saying this from the beginning, and Mary, who appeared to her many, many times in the course of the coming decades, she's never rebuked her on this point, so she said, Mary would have said something had I been wrong in this understanding and interpretation. That's the one point, the role of the scapular and, of course, the Carmelite whole idea of of role of Mary. And the other one having to do with Joseph, we are just seeing a budding of Josephite devotion and theology, if you might call it that is beginning to appreciate more and more the role of Joseph in the economy of salvation. It started with Pope John inserting in the Roman canon back in 1960 the name of Joseph into the Litany of the Saints in the first part of the Eucharistic prayer, the first Eucharistic prayer today for us. And it continues with the writings and sayings of the Pope, particularly John Paul II, who wrote Redemptor Custos, custodian of the Redeemer, in order to develop this idea of a theology that brings Mary and Joseph together in a particular human order of grace, which he calls the order of incarnation, and of course whose sole purpose is its support and its relationship to the incarnation, unique in all of human history, these two individuals. So I thought that those were two things that I appreciated, especially, I think, out of the Fátima message.
And we have Mark listening in Chicago with our very first question on this show. You can call into, the number is 1-800-585-9396 and be on the show here with Colin Donovan, Robert Klesko, and David Gregson, speaking about the continuing importance of the apparitions and the message of the apparitions of Our Lady of Fatima. And Mark is listening through Sirius XM 130. Mark, your question for our theologians. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Just one real quick comment before I ask my question. That, I think I was just kind of reading, it was probably the autobiography of Lucia, but just a description of when the first time they encountered the angel before our Mother of God appeared to them. She had explained that by the time the angel left, and it was almost sundown, and they had to and it was her and her cousins had to go back to their home. It says that they were literally just kind of robbed of their energy, and it was just a super power energy that was kind of filled them up, but yet it just left them drained that they couldn't barely make it back home. But it was such a wonderful energy. Mm-hmm. They couldn't explain it. Does that sound like an accurate description?
Well, from what I've read too, and I don't know if either of you have read any more or differently on this, I sort of like equating it to the experience of Moses in being thrown down, throwing himself down on the ground, or others who have experienced the three angels that appeared to Abraham. There's this idea of the overpowering presence of God, and in the face of that, maybe an analogy would be living here in the South and we have tornadoes, and that you get an experience of the overwhelming power and force of nature, and it's somewhat prostrating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I recall that they did describe the effect of the angels appearing to them as overwhelming, and they contrasted with it the apparition of the Blessed Mother, that in effect she was brighter, but nonetheless there was a maternal atmosphere about her that wasn't so intimidating. So my impression is that it was just the glory of the angel.
Yeah.
That
I think it's very human too. If you do some intensely intellectual work at the, maybe you skip a meal or something like that. You're working very hard on something. You're done with it. There's that relief of you've done this, and then sometimes there's sort of, I've had this tremendous, intense experience, and now I'm sort of in recovery.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting as well that the children, in encountering the angelic nature of the angel, this is something that's not familiar to us as human beings. And so, of course, there's a tendency to squint a little bit more, if you will, because they're unfamiliar. The work of the holy angels, as important as it is, it's not familiar to us because they have that elevated nature. But in seeing Mary, the light reflecting more brightly off of her, because of course she's reflecting the light of a divine person, her son, but yet at the same time there's an accessibility. There's that approachability of the Mother of God, which takes us to Christ, who of course took on our human nature. And so there's that ease of access, which I think reflects well when we reflect on grace and the role of grace in our lives.
Mm-hmm. And we will continue talking about the continuing importance of the messages in the apparitions of Our Lady of Fatima in just a moment here on EWTN Theology Roundtable. You can call in with your questions. We have one line open right now, 1-800-585-9396. We'll be back right away with more in a moment. Stay tuned.
EWTN Religious Catalog is your online destination for Catholic books, DVDs, rosaries, devotionals, and every purchase directly supports EWTN's mission. Ready to shop? Visit EWTNRC.com today.
60 on 10 with Monsignor Charles Pope.
The 10th commandment, you shall not desire anything that is your neighbor's. This commandment is similar to the 9th because it uses the word covet, which means to inordinately or inappropriately desire something. And therefore, related to this are concepts that are familiar to us, such as greed or avarice, which is the undue passion for riches and powers. And likewise, envy and jealousy are related here. Jealousy, you have something that I want, but I want it inappropriately or inordinately. Likewise, though, envy is a very dark thing because it wants to destroy that which is good in another, because it makes me look bad by comparison. And so, in all these ways, the Lord is asking us to look very carefully to our desires, because they can grow too expansive and lead us into very grave sins. The 10th commandment, you shall not desire anything that is your neighbor's.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic. Looking for a solid and dependable Catholic radio station in your area? One that's uplifting and authoritative? A trustworthy tool for the new evangelization? God may be calling you to a mission in Catholic radio. Find out how you can start a Catholic radio station where you live, powered by the truth of the Church and EWTN's dynamic radio programming.
Contact me, Jack Williams, at 205-795-5756 or jwilliams@EWTN.com.
Hi, this is Dan Burke from the National Catholic Register.
Hello, this is Bishop David O'Connell of the Diocese of Trenton.
Hi, this is Teresa Tomeo, host of Catholic Connection, and thanks for listening to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Welcome back to EWTN Theology Roundtable on EWTN Radio and Television. Join our conversation with your question or comment. Call us toll-free, 1-800-585-9396. Outside the United States and Canada, call 1-205-271-2985 or send us an email, etr@ewtn.com.
We're glad you're joining us here on EWTN Theology Roundtable. Elena Rodriguez welcoming you if you just joined us now, and we hope you continue with us. We are talking about the continuing importance of the messages of Our Lady in Fatima and how they are as current as ever. What was 100 years ago, still current today, will continue to be current. And what a lovely presentation that our theologians did earlier about the light of the message of Fatima. You can call in with your questions. We have Christopher, Andre, Richard, and we can have you on here as well. 1-800-585-9396, and you can ask your question to Colin Donovan, David Gregson, and Robert Klesko, our theologians here with EWTN Theology Roundtable. We have Christopher on the line in New Mexico. And Christopher, what is your question? Go right ahead. You're live. Hello, Christopher. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
All right, go ahead. Please ask your question.
How can the Lady of Fatima help us get through life?
Okay, well, that's That's a very good question. I think the more we think of Mary as we think of our own natural mommies, our mothers, so how does a mother help? She feeds, she clothes, she tries to help get over scrapes and scraps and so on that happen in our everyday life. And Our Lady wants to do the same thing for all of us in the more important areas, to be good people, to be good disciples of Jesus. But she also will help us even in our daily life, in the ordinary things of life as well, as our mothers routinely do. So if you think of Our Lady as our spiritual mother, because she was the mother of our Lord, then I think you will find that you have many reasons to call out to her for her help, to look to her for guidance, and the answer to prayers in needs of all kinds.
Yeah. Well,
Go ahead, David.
When we make mistakes, it's as if we fell down. And just as our mother would pick us up, we fell down, so Our Lady will pick us up, and she'll help us to walk in the right way again.
Yeah, and I think a pleasant image in regard to Our Lady and thinking about motherhood, and reminder to everybody, it's Mother's Day coming up pretty soon, is that image of protection. And of course, Byzantine Catholics have a special love for the apparition of the protection of the Mother of God, where she spread out her mantle of protection around the city. And I think that's such a wonderful maternal image, because we live in a world where it can be scary at times. And I know from my own home experience, when my boys are scared, they go to Mom. And it's just this natural instinct that they have. Nobody told them, well, when you get scared, you go to Mom. They just do it. They just even if I'm around, there's nothing like
they will run past her.
Yeah, exactly. No, I don't want you, Dad. I want Mom. There's a comfort that moms bring that I think Mary in our age, which can be very frightening at times. Mary provides that for us, and being close to her provides us with that spiritual comfort that really helps with getting through this life. So, good question, Christopher.
Yeah, and Mary is very much associated with, in the writings of St. Louis de Montfort, St. Faustina Kowalska, as well as in those of John Paul II, with this maternal idea of love. He speaks of God in his encyclical on the Father, on divine mercy. He calls it a womb love. It's the deepest kind of maternal love. Although God is neither male or female, you can find in him the hound of heaven on the one hand, and the love of tenderness of a mother on the other. And so Mary is an exemplar of that motherly love to us, representing our Lord, and so we can turn to her. I was thinking of the devotion when you're talking about different images and ideas that the Pope has to Our Lady Untier of Knots, getting you out of the fixes you get yourself in. The way Our Lady of Fatima came to get the world out of the fixes we've got ourselves in by our sin, by our wars, by our hatred and racial antipathies and all the things that have produced the world in which we are.
And we have a question from John, who is teaching a class, tuning into our show here on EWTN Theology Roundtable. John's question is, what are the secrets that Sister Lucia received in Fatima?
The vision of hell, the promise that about Russia would spread her airs, but Mary would come to ask for the consecration of Russia to her Immaculate Heart, and then the third one that was revealed in 2000 of the Pope who ascends the mountain and is struck down. And that's been applied to John Paul II, at least in an exemplary fashion, of how the popes in the Church suffer, something that was predicted at Fatima in a general way.
You can call in with your questions about the continuing importance of the messages from Our Lady of Fatima. Here and bounce them off are theologians Colin Donovan, Robert Klesko, and David Gregson on EWTN Theology Roundtable. Our lines are open. We do have a line right now. Good moment to call. 1-800-585-9396. That number again is 1-800-585-9396. Richard is in Plano, Texas, listening to us through the Guadalupe Radio Network. Richard, your question, please. Go right ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much for taking my call. My question was concerning Amelia, the children's playmate who Our Lady said would spend her time in purgatory. Do we have any other biographical information concerning Amelia, basically how she died or how old she was? And is there anything we can do to relieve some of her time?
Sure. Well, there has been some dispute as to what is claimed, and I have the text in front of me, that Lucia was asking about different children, and she asked about Amelia, who had died. In what circumstances, we don't know, or biographical details, we really don't know. And Our Lady said she was asking whether she's in heaven. Our Lady said she's in purgatory, will be in purgatory till the end of time. We don't know why that would be, but there's no reason, and there have been some questions whether that is exactly correct, because in the earliest accounts, that is not in there. It's something that got interpolated. But Sister Lucia herself, in her calls from the Message of Fatima, seems to affirm that later account as being true. So I think there's a little bit of scholarly dispute on the accuracy of that. But as a general matter, I think we can do what we can do for any soul in purgatory, because history is not written. This idea that there's a fated outcome, that everything is inevitable, we can't stop it, we can't do anything about it, we can't correct it. The only one thing that is inevitable is if we go to hell, we're not getting out. But regarding purgatory, you can offer an indulgence for Amelia, you can pray for her, and whether the justice is satisfied, of course, is up to God.
Might put a positive spin on it, as she will be there until the end of her time, and maybe we can shorten her time by offering sacrifices and indulgences and so on.
And I think Lucia doesn't foreclose an early release, but she talks about God's mercy in this context.
We have Andre listening in Fresno, California through Sirius XM 130. Andre, your question for Colin Donovan, David Gregson, and Robert Klesko. Go right ahead, please.
Buddy, so very oddly, my question was essentially the same as the previous caller. This is something that's always kind of bothered me for a long time since reading the Fátima story as a child. Why this little girl would be in purgatory forever, and I was wondering if maybe someone could obtain a plenary indulgence if this girl could get out a little earlier than the end of the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think the ordinary economy applies to that. This economy of salvation. So I think you can make use of those means, whether or not the scholarly debate favors one position that she said this in this way or the other, which is that's not an actual early representation of what Our Lady said. Either way, it's significant in the context that today how many people at their funeral are actually told pray for the deceased. It raises the general problem. We should always pray for the deceased. They may be a saint in heaven. They may be in purgatory. They may be in the other place and can't be rescued. But prayer and the will that we bring to that, the love we bring to that, is always valuable, even if it would seem to be wasted on the damned. We don't pray for the damned intentionally, but if that should be what we're doing in effect, it's still valuable for us to have that charity.
And God can always take our prayer and apply it where He will. I mean, He's God; He can do that. And doesn't this whole question fit well within the message of Fatima and Our Lady's call for penance for the conversion of sinners? Well, that's sinners certainly who are still walking the earth, and we have plenty of examples of those. but that's also sinners undergoing purgation in preparation for receiving the beatific vision. So when Our Lady talks about specific people, one thing that my mother-in-law always says is, we're in sales, not management. We let God take care of all of the judgment and who's where, and all we're called to do is be faithful, do what Our Lady asks us to do, offer sacrifice and prayer for the salvation of sinners, both in this world and in the next, and we'll let God divvy up the graces where He sees fit.
We have Joan, who is in Pennsylvania. I won't pronounce the name of the town because it's a little bit tricky. Listening through Holy Family Radio. Joan, what is the name of your town? Joan, what is the name of your town?
Shermansdale. It's near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Well, welcome. What is your question?
Thank you. I wondered if they could explain the scapular, and I can hang up and listen on the radio if that's okay.
Well, it's for lay people. It's, you would say, an imitation of the Carmelite habit. Hence, it's 2 pieces of brown wool. A scapular in religious life is an outer garment that goes over the main garment and hangs down in front and back. It's generally a work garment that allows the person not, if they're washing dishes or doing other things, they're not soiling their main habit. And so it's roll up your sleeves and get to work kind of clothing. And so lay people can wear basically a smaller imitation version of that associates themselves with the Carmelites, who look, of course, to Our Lady in their spirituality. And so it represents, and the scapular of Our Lady of Mount Carmel is specifically a consecration to Our Lady, but as de Montfort explains it, to Jesus through Mary, so that it's one way of manifesting one's devotion to Our Lady.
It was given to Saint Simon Stock, who was an English Carmelite, and I remember being in Catholic school. I was in 6th grade, I believe, and my wonderful teachers, Mrs. Bell and Mrs. Schwark, made sure everybody got enrolled in the brown scapular, and that's something very easy that any priest can do. And it's such a wonderful and really simple devotion and a simple sign of trust in the protection of Mary. And really, it made. I remember that day very, very clearly when I was in 6th grade, and it was a tremendous source of building up our faith. And so it's a devotion certainly for all Catholics to engage in, but I think especially for children. And I'm thinking of Christopher's question from earlier: how can Mary help us through life? Well, I think turning to the scapular and learning about it a little bit more can certainly help.
And it's one of the pillars of the message of Fátima, which Sister Lucia pointed out. That consecration to Our Lady, the wearing the scapular, the 5 first Saturdays, the saying of the Rosary, making reparation for others. So it's certainly part of that devotion.
Right, I was just going to say that it does carry an obligation to say the little office of Blessed Virgin Mary, or in place of that, a daily Rosary.
Right. Yes, that's part of the commitment to do that.
Yeah.
And it's always good when one makes a Marian consecration or do anything like to have a sort of like, not a formal retreat necessarily, but a period of personal preparation for that. And whether it's for your first making of the Marian consecration, to do the de Montfort, or there are other versions of preparation, the 33-day one I think we've talked about on this program before, to do any of those kinds of things, so that it's not a membership card. It's not a little checkbox, so I've ticked this off, now I move on to the next little devotion. No, it's the commitment to go to Jesus through Mary and to imitate her discipleship with respect to God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
And Chris is in the very heart of the Show Me State, Jefferson City, Missouri. Chris, your question, please. Go ahead.
Hi, yes. First, let me say thank you for your show. It's very informative. My question goes to Christopher, the young boy that asked the question, and I love the answer. I'm on board with that. It works for me too, and I turn to Mary as a maternal figure. But I sometimes find that I'm confused. I feel like I sometimes should be praying instead to Jesus to help fix my scraped knee, and sometimes I feel like I'm headed the right direction, but why? What about Jesus? I mean, why would I pray to Mary when I can go direct to the source? That is kind of gets me hung up sometimes.
Well, for the same reason, why would the Father send the Son incarnate, the Word, and cause him to go incarnate, when he could have simply absolved the human race? It's an instrument he chose to use, and he received that human nature through Mary. She is intimately tied with his incarnation and therefore with his redemption. It is, for Catholics, should see it not primarily as this, but it ought to be a starting point if there's no devotion to Our Lady, which you clearly have. And that is, it's an obligation of justice to acknowledge those who are instruments in our life. Would any of us say to our parents, well, I've thanked God for my existence and my life and my clothing and my being cared for you by you people, but I'm not grateful to you people for being instruments in God's plan for my natural life? We would never say that, because we recognize it's an obligation of justice. Honor your father and mother. Mary is covered by that fourth commandment. Mm-hmm. Because the greater thing, redemption, she was an instrument immediately and directly in the redemption of every single human being. Only Joseph could claim that, or maybe the apostles, but not in quite the same way.
Yeah, if I ask Mary for something, that doesn't mean I won't also ask Jesus for the same thing. I mean, there's no it doesn't have to be either or. It can be both and.
And he gave us parables of pestering, you might call it.
Right, right.
So be persistent.
Yeah, I think that praying to Mary gives added energy to your prayer to Jesus. So it's she helps you pray. So it's not that Jesus is going to be shortchanged if you pray to Mary.
And we have a question from Trevor listening through YouTube. By the way, you can check out our YouTube webcast here for all of our live shows by going to youtube.com. And then on the search bar, type EWTN channel, and you'll be able to chime in with your questions on our YouTube chat while we're doing our live webcast. So Trevor is asking, he's saying he has heard from an Orthodox priest saying that the titular king of Portugal said that the prophecy about Russia was going to convert not to Catholicism but to Orthodoxy. He wants to know if that is true.
I have not seen anything in the in any of the formal or authoritative writings that anybody can say anything they want. Now, some, in looking to make the claim Russia's not been converted, have been looking for an almost instantaneous conversion of Russia. They can hope for that in the same way we could hope for an almost instantaneous conversion of America. But that's not how things work. Even if God were to give some great sign for the whole world, like the miracle of the sun was, the miracle of the sun occurred. There were atheists before, there were atheists after, who had seen the miracle of the sun. These are human processes that work out. And Russia's conversion, as a lot of mystics and saints have said over the year, Christianity will one day be unified again. But along the way there will be many steps, and I think we are seeing some of that take place.
I think certainly you can see that Russia is in a much better position than it was under the socialist yoke, under the communist yoke. And certainly Fátima has had a lot to do with that, with the resurgence of Russian Orthodoxy. Now, of course, we share in imperfect communion with the Russian Orthodox. We're working on establishing that full communion, but I think you can see there's been a lot of progress. One thing that I came up with in my research is the return of the icon of Our Lady of Kazan by John Paul II to the Russian Orthodox Church. I think that was in 2003. But it came to John Paul II via the Blue Army, The icon was smuggled out of Russia during the revolution and ended up in private hands, and then it was purchased by the Blue Army. And the Blue Army was thinking, well, what can we do with this beautiful icon of Our Lady, which has historic ties to Eastern Europe? Well, there's this Polish Pope in Rome. Let's give it to him. And it was hanging in John Paul II's personal chapel in the Vatican, and it was a constant focal point for him. And certainly, we know that John Paul II had such a tremendous impact on the fall of communism. Really, that peaceful fall of communism, which even secular scholars, they look at that the history of it and they go, we don't know how this happened. But there's this Polish Pope and this American president and this English Prime Minister who all in their own ways had such a peaceful yet strong impact, and especially John Paul because of his native Poland. I mean, it's just miraculous, and how that process facilitated greater relations with the Orthodox churches. So I think we can continue to hope for closer communion between Rome and all of the Orthodox churches.
And I think the Orthodox churches generally are different, say, from Protestantism or other religions, non-Christian religions, except for the Jewish people, is they think of themselves more as a people having this religion. And I think the conversion of the Orthodox will be as a people, almost in the same way you could say the conversion of the Jews, of which St. Paul and others speak of, that will be as a people there would be a conversion. And I think we have that day to look forward to, obviously, in both cases. But what we do have is we have had the obstacle of a militant atheistic state being removed from the practice of religion in Russia, and that has given a space and freedom that is, in a way, more expansive than we even experience in the West now. That's something to reflect on. Who needs the converting more in terms of freedom and the ability to worship God according to our conscience? The Russians or us?
Walter is in Graham, Washington, listening through Sacred Heart Radio. Real quick, Walter, your question, please.
Yes, I'd like to ask why the Catholic clergy and the Catholics as a whole, it seems to me we should be asking Mary to appear again, asking angels to appear until they're here permanently. I mean, it seems to me church should be a vehicle for that. We should sit at church and say, now, let's meditate and see if we can get Mary to appear and talk to us. I mean, there's no real religion otherwise than that.
Well, the trouble with that is almost every theologian, especially of mysticism in the history of the church, would say bad idea because there are other powers that like to insert themselves. So one of the strongest rules in Catholic spiritual theology is you don't go seeking and you don't go asking for these kinds of experiences. If God imposes them on you, you should not want them until it's clear that it's God. So no, this is something the church would never do because it's simply a bad idea and it invites other forces to insert themselves.
Yeah, and God has already given us the vehicles for grace with the sacraments that we can live a graced life now, and we're not dependent on apparitions. And so if God wants to give us those mercies, that's all in His time, but we have the wonderful system of the sacraments and the prayers of the saints and Our Lady to help us along the way until God sees fit to visit us more permanently
in the future.
Thank you very much. To Colin Donovan, Robert Klesko, and David Gregson, my thanks, my gratitude, and to Our Lady of Fatima for coming down and visiting us here on this earth. More information on EWTN.com/Fatima. This is Elena Rodriguez saying, Our Lady of Fatima, pray for us. Stay tuned.